There was a wine glass in the sink. A single lipstick smear on the rim. That's how I knew something was off. We don't drink wine in this house. We don't even own glasses like that. I stared at it for a good 5 minutes, like it might explain itself if I looked hard enough. She hadn't been home in 3 days. Girls' only wedding, she said, as if that erased me completely. I didn't argue. I rarely do. Arguing with her is like throwing pebbles at a freight train and expecting it to stop. She barrels through everything: logic, guilt, facts. I just sweep up the aftermath. She returned Sunday night with sand in her shoes and a sunburn on her shoulders. I asked how it went. She said, "Unforgettable." Then she hugged me like a coworker does after a long project. Flat, brief, perfunctory. Her perfume was different. I only noticed because I bought her the last bottle myself, and it wasn't that one. The next morning, she was in the bathroom longer than usual. I stood outside the door, listening to a muffled conversation through the speakerphone. All I caught was, "Didn't use anything," and "Symptoms started yesterday," and then the unmistakable sound of her softly swearing. When she opened the door and saw me there, her whole body jumped. "You scared me," she laughed. But her laugh didn't reach her eyes. 2 days later, she handed me a folded printout from the clinic. No words, just paper. I unfolded it with shaking hands. I'm not a doctor. I didn't understand all of it. But I saw the words positive and trichomoniasis, and the room tilted sideways. I sat down on the floor without meaning to. She finally spoke. "It's not that serious. We'll both take a round of meds and—" "I haven't slept with anyone but you," I said. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was loaded, like a paused recording before something awful plays. She opened her mouth, closed it, blinked like she was buying time from some invisible teleprompter. Then she said it. It was after the rehearsal dinner. I was drunk. It didn't mean anything. It wasn't even supposed to happen. I couldn't look at her. I looked at the damn wine glass in the sink. I remembered how I'd spent the weekend fixing the jammed sliding door on the patio, the one she kept saying was annoying. I remember texting her a picture of the fixed track and getting no response. She was probably with him then, maybe even still smelling like me when he touched her. I asked one question. Was it someone I know? She didn't answer, but her face told me everything. And just like that, I knew it was someone from our world, someone who knew me, shook my hand, maybe even toasted our anniversary once. And that made it worse. So I started planning. Not out of rage. Not even grief. Something quieter. Sharper. A kind of revenge that wouldn't break the law, but would break something deeper. I didn't take the pills. She left them on the nightstand in a little brown bottle next to a glass of water, like that made her betrayal some kind of manageable infection we could rinse away. I stared at them that night until sunrise, wondering if I'd wake up feeling more like a man again once I swallowed them. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized I wasn't the one who needed curing. She floated through the next week like a ghost of herself, avoiding eye contact, filling the silence with cheerful hums and pointless small talk. She made pancakes on a Tuesday. She started folding my laundry, which she hadn't done in months. She even suggested we go away together the following weekend to reset. I nodded through it all, making notes in my head like a journalist documenting a crumbling regime. That same Tuesday night, I opened her laptop while she was in the shower. She's never been great with technology. Didn't even log out of anything. One click, and I was staring at a string of Facebook DMs she didn't even bother to delete. His name was Preston. Preston Ryland. The same guy who toasted her at our wedding. The same guy who once said, "Man, you're lucky. She's too much woman for most of us." I thought it was a compliment at the time. I didn't realize it was foreshadowing. Their messages were laced with inside jokes and nicknames I'd never heard before. She called him Bear. He called her Firecracker. One message burned hotter than the rest. "Can't stop thinking about that hallway. Still feel your nails in my back." Wasn't just the champagne talking. My chest hollowed out. I wasn't angry. That's the strangest part. I just felt displaced. Like I'd accidentally walked into someone else's life, someone who mattered less. Someone who didn't have a voice. I took screenshots. Saved them to a flash drive. Tucked it in my jacket pocket like a relic. That weekend, I agreed to go on her little reset getaway. A cozy cabin upstate. Her idea of romance. I packed her favorite snacks. I even let her play the road trip playlist without skipping her Taylor Swift songs like I usually did. She thought we were healing. On the second night, I made dinner. She lit candles. I poured wine, yes, that wine The one from the glass she left in the sink. I bought the same bottle out of spite. I wanted her to taste the memory of her mistake. After dinner, I told her I had a surprise. She looked excited, hopeful, like a woman who truly believed she'd gotten away with it and that everything was finally smoothing over. I handed her a wrapped box. Inside was a small photo album. On the front, our story. She opened it slowly, smiling at first as she turned through the early pages, wedding photos, vacations, silly selfies. Then she reached the final section. It was titled, The Hidden Chapter. Screenshots, dates, texts, location data from her phone showing she never stayed in the hotel room she told me she shared with her bridesmaids. A copy of the clinic results. A short printed message from me at the end. You didn't catch an STD. You caught freedom. I'm giving it to you and taking mine back. She didn't speak for almost a full minute. Then she looked up at me, eyes wide with shock, mouth half open like she was about to gasp and forgot how. You've been planning this? She whispered. No, I said. I've been surviving this. She lunged for the album like she could tear it apart, erase the evidence, rewrite the story. But I didn't flinch. I didn't raise my voice. I just stood there and watched her unravel in silence, the same way she had done to me, piece by piece, lie by lie. Then I walked out into the cold, got in the car, and drove away. She didn't follow. She didn't call. And when I returned home, I already had a locksmith scheduled. The cabin night never ended with shouting. No thrown plates. No slapped cheeks. That was her fantasy, some melodramatic fight she could later reframe for sympathy. No, I gave her nothing. Not even closure. I simply walked out into the cold with the sound of her stammering questions still hanging in the air. The door clicked shut like the last note in a funeral hymn. And I never looked back. When I returned to the house, everything felt unfamiliar, though nothing had moved. The couch still sagged in the middle. The ugly vase her sister gave us still stood on the windowsill. Even her mug was on the counter, half full of tea gone stale. But I felt like an intruder in my own life. A man living inside someone else's choices. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay there listening to the refrigerator hum and the branches tap against the siding like they were trying to whisper some warning I ignored. At dawn, I got up, showered, shaved, put on the shirt she always said made me look too serious, and I went to the lawyer. I'd already booked the consultation online. He didn't ask many questions. Just handed me a folder and said, if you're ready, we'll move. I was ready. I signed my name slowly on every line like it was some ancient ritual, each pin stroke cutting a string that had kept me tethered to that poison version of love. Clarabelle didn't know I'd already set everything in motion. I wanted it that way. She was still trying to perform forgiveness, leaving me cheerful notes, buying groceries I liked, pretending our story hadn't been rewritten in ink I could never scrub out. When the divorce papers arrived, I made sure they were delivered to her at work, the local bank where she played the role of the golden employee. Everyone thought she was a sweetheart, the kind who brought cookies to meetings and remembered your dog's name. I pictured her at her desk, opening that envelope, smile melting, eyes darting to the windows, wondering if I was out there watching. I wasn't. I was at home, waiting for the detonation. It came fast. She called 23 times. I didn't answer once. Not because I didn't want to hear her beg, I did, but because silence had become my sharpest tool. I didn't raise my voice. I just raised the consequences. She finally showed up at the house 3 days later, pounding on the door like she'd just discovered gravity had betrayed her. I opened it with the chain still on. She looked thinner. Or maybe just smaller. You're really doing this? She asked, eyes already glossed over. I nodded. You already did. She reached into her bag and pulled out a tiny white envelope, waving it like a magic wand. I got retested. I'm clean now. We can just fix it. It was one mistake. I tilted my head. Then you won't mind explaining why Preston's wife emailed me last night. That was the twist she didn't see coming. Yes, I had found her affair partner. But what she didn't know was that I had also found his wife. Maggie Ryland. The quiet type. A little crunchy. 2 kids, 1 golden retriever, and apparently a husband with 0 boundaries at weddings. She and I had spoken on the phone, just once, but it was enough. The kind of conversation where neither person needs to cry because the silence between sentences says everything. Clarabelle's face turned the color of spoiled milk. You didn't. Oh, I did, I said. You infected our marriage. I returned the favor truthfully. She looked like she was going to be sick. And then she backed away, muttering something about lawyers and how I was taking things too far. But she didn't fight. She didn't scream. She just left. I closed the door. And I smiled. Not because I was healed. Not even close. But because finally, she didn't get to write the ending. I didn't expect the fallout to move like wildfire. I thought it would be a slow unraveling, a quiet, bitter ending that only affected the two of us and, maybe, Preston's marriage in parallel. But no. Within days of the divorce papers hitting Clarabelle's desk and the Rylands getting their own blast of truth, everything detonated. I wasn't trying to go nuclear. I really wasn't. I just handed the match to people with more gasoline than I realized. It started with a group message one I wasn't part of, but someone forwarded to me anonymously. It was a screenshot of a thread between several women Clarabelle knew. Bridesmaids, college friends, coworkers. Apparently, Preston had made his rounds. My wife wasn't the only one he'd accidentally reconnected with during the wedding weekend. In fact, a few of them had stories that went back further years. That wedding wasn't a one-night lapse. It was a full-blown reunion tour of bad decisions, and Clarabelle's performance wasn't even the opening act. One of the women wrote, "I thought he was just drunk and charming. But if he did this to Maggie, if Dan reached out, that means it's all real." My name was being tossed around in circles of people I'd never even met. At first, it was unsettling. Then it became strangely empowering. My silence had created a vacuum, and the truth, now unchained, rushed in to fill it. Maggie Ryland called me again that Thursday. Not crying this time. In fact, she sounded focused. She told me she was filing for separation. Said she had already told the kids and was looking into therapy. Then she paused, her voice dropping an octave. "I hope you know you did the right thing. Not just for yourself, for a lot of us." I didn't know what to say. I just nodded into the phone like an idiot. Then she added, almost like an afterthought, "You should really check the bank account." I hung up, logged in. My heart stopped. Clarabelle had moved $4,300 out of our joint savings. Not hidden, not sneaky, just transferred into a new account I didn't recognize. There was a memo on the transaction, emergency retainer. My mouth went dry. The panic set in like cement. I called the lawyer. He was calm, too calm, like he'd seen this kind of petty retaliation 1,000 times. He told me to stay ahead of her. So I did. I froze the remaining accounts, redirected all mail, transferred the utilities. I left her with nothing to burn and nowhere to claim ashes from. She must have realized she couldn't win the legal game because her next move was social. Instagram photos of smiling brunches, captions about healing and the strength of a woman rebuilding from betrayal. Friends started reaching out, confused, half concerned, half suspicious. She was painting herself as the victim of a bitter, overreactive husband who couldn't let go of one mistake. I didn't argue. I posted nothing. But I did something better. The flash drive I'd filled with her messages, photos, and timeline, I slipped it into a manila envelope and mailed it, anonymously, to her boss at the bank. Not because I wanted to ruin her life, but because the company she worked for had a strict ethical policy, especially around off-site events and inter-colleague conduct. She'd lied to HR about the trip. She'd called it a personal vacation. What I sent proved otherwise. 2 weeks later, she was asked to resign. She posted a vague quote on Facebook. "When they can't control you, they try to control the way others see you." That one actually made me laugh. By then, I was already out of the house, staying at a short-term rental over the bookstore downtown. The walls were thin. The bed creaked. The hot water sputtered sometimes. But I was sleeping. Really sleeping for the first time in months. Not thinking about wine glasses in the sink or quiet moans through the bathroom door, or the way she used to reach for her phone before she'd kiss me good morning. I went on walks. I journaled. I started painting again, not birds this time, but messy, abstract things. Rage-colored shapes. Cathartic explosions on canvas that never needed to be pretty. They just needed to exist. Then, out of nowhere, Maggie messaged me again. Just one line. "You ever wonder what would happen if we turned this mess into something useful?" And just like that, my story was no longer just about survival. It was about creation. Maggie's message stayed on my screen for nearly an hour before I responded. "You ever wonder what would happen if we turned this mess into something useful?" I read it over and over, trying to figure out what she meant. Was she suggesting some kind of support group? A joint lawsuit? A podcast where betrayed spouses air their dirty laundry into microphones? I didn't know. I just knew I wasn't ready to return to being passive again. So I wrote back. "Define useful." Her response came almost instantly. She'd already started gathering stories. Apparently, I wasn't the first person Preston had cheated on, just the first one who didn't eat the lie in silence. After the wedding mess, Maggie had gone down the rabbit hole. Messages, old social media posts, connections she hadn't seen before. Her husband had left fingerprints all over other people's marriages, and most of them never even knew it. Until now. She told me she wanted to build a platform, not for vengeance, but for accountability. A kind of anonymous submission site where people could connect the dots. Not to out cheaters, but to allow betrayed partners to tell their stories in a space that didn't judge them for staying too long or for walking away too late. She was calling it the red string, like those boards detectives use, where all the evidence eventually connects. I told her I'd think about it. I didn't have to think long. The idea haunted me for days. I started imagining how different my story would have been if I had known about the others, if I'd seen the signs. If someone had spoken up before the infection, literal and emotional, spread into my life like rot under paint. I kept going back to that damn wine glass in the sink. That one subtle clue. How many others had those same moments but no way to make sense of them? So I said yes. I helped her build it. Maggie handled the outreach, the infrastructure, even the design, sleek, dark, anonymous. I worked on the content moderation, the verification process, the messaging. We weren't publishing names. No witch hunts. Just stories. Pure, raw, awful stories from people who felt like they'd been screaming underwater. Within the first week, we had over 300 submissions. People from all over the country, a teacher in Minnesota, a mother of 3 in Arizona, a man who discovered his wife's second phone after their baby was born. Some stories were gentle in tone, others vicious. But they all shared the same spine. Someone trusted, someone lied, and someone else paid the price. It was like a collective exorcism. Clarabelle found out about it 2 weeks later. She emailed me directly, subject line, "Are you insane?" The message was short and venomous. She accused me of creating a hate engine, said I was obsessed, claimed I was dragging everyone down because you couldn't handle one mistake. I didn't reply, but I did publish my own story that night. Fully anonymized. Changed the names, tweaked the timeline, left out the legal details. But it was my truth. Every line. Every scar. It ended with the same sentence I'd whispered the day I left the cabin. "You didn't catch an STD. You caught freedom." Maggie read it and called me crying. Not because she was sad, but because she finally felt seen. Her own post had just gone live the night before, and it was already being shared. She said it was the first time she'd felt real in months, not just some abandoned spouse with a hollow ring on her finger. And just like that, we weren't victims anymore. We were architects. And Clarabelle? She didn't just lose me. She lost the narrative. People began whispering. Not publicly, not directly, but just enough to shift the air around her. A job interview she was banking on suddenly ghosted her. A friend removed her from a group chat. A bridesmaid from that infamous wedding posted a vague but scathing reflection about loyalty and masks. She tried to clean up her image, of course. New photos. Yoga retreats. A quote from Rumi about transformation. But it was too late. She used to be the storm. Now, she was standing in the wreckage of one we built, quietly, methodically, righteously. And we weren't done yet. It's strange how fast a reputation can rot once it starts unraveling. Clarabelle, for years, had built this pristine persona. She wasn't just the charming bank manager with a killer smile. She was the one who brought cookies to staff meetings, remembered coworkers' birthdays, volunteered at the library, and always seemed to know the right thing to say. Her image was polished, curated, even. And then, like the shine on cheap jewelry, it began to flake. It wasn't just because of me. In fact, I'd done everything by the book. My lawyer said I was one of the most gracefully vicious clients he'd ever seen. I didn't go public. I didn't slander her name. I simply let the truth exist in the right places. And when people started connecting dots on their own, well, that was the thing about masks. Once they slip, they rarely go back on the same way. The red string exploded. By the end of the 3rd month, Maggie and I were flooded with submissions, hundreds more. We had to bring on 2 volunteers just to keep up with moderation. People were reading, commenting, connecting. It became more than a story hub. It became a mirror. For some, it was validation. For others, it was revelation. And for a few, it was warning. One night, I opened a message that stopped me cold. It was from a woman named Erica. She was a wedding photographer. Had shot Marcy's wedding, the wedding. Clarabelle's alibi. Erica had recognized the description of my story, despite the anonymity. She even attached a photo, not meant for public release, of the bridal party backstage, just before the reception. And there, clear as day, was Preston, standing beside Clarabelle in a dark hallway, his hand low on her back, her head tilted back in laughter. Their chemistry in the photo wasn't subtle. It was radioactive. But that wasn't the worst part. The timestamp on the photo placed it almost exactly during the window when Clarabelle had called me from her hotel room, whispering that she missed me and was just lying in bed watching old rom-coms. She lied. Even then. Even when I couldn't see her. Even when I still trusted her voice in the dark. I didn't post the photo. I didn't need to. But I saved it. Not for revenge. Not for proof. But because sometimes, when people rewrite your history, you have to hold on to the evidence that your pain was real. Meanwhile, Clarabelle was busy trying to relaunch herself. She started a blog. A brand. Even. Rise with Clarabelle. That was the name. Self-empowerment. Healing after heartbreak. She wrote flowery posts about resilience and the courage to start again. She gave thinly veiled advice to those holding on to bitterness, and even offered virtual coaching sessions to help others reclaim their narrative. It was a performance, a glitter-coated response to the truth she could no longer bury. People weren't buying it. Not because I told them not to. I never mentioned her name. I never pointed fingers. I didn't have to. The cracks were showing. And the people who had once followed her for smiles and sympathy now sensed something hollow underneath. Her blog never gained traction. The comments dwindled. She posted less. Her Instagram captions became shorter. Eventually, she turned her account private. Meanwhile, I was changing too. At some point during all this, Maggie and I stopped just emailing about the site. We started texting, then calling, then meeting up. She lived 2 hours away, but the drive became a ritual, one I looked forward to. Not because of romance. Not yet. But because when I talked to her, I didn't feel like a broken record. I didn't feel like a cautionary tale. I felt understood. She didn't flinch when I admitted I still sometimes dreamed about Clarabelle, or when I confessed that part of me missed the comfort of routine, even if it came with betrayal. Maggie had her own ghosts, her own version of normal that had been poisoned. We weren't trying to fill each other's gaps. We were simply learning how to exist in the aftermath. One weekend, we met at a quiet cafe near a lake. We sat outside, drinking coffee, and watching ducks drift aimlessly across the water. I asked her, half joking, "You think we'll ever stop being the people they cheated on?" She took a long sip before answering. Maybe. Or maybe we just become the people who turned it into something better. It hit me harder than I expected. I had spent months punishing silence, making sure the truth had a place to breathe. But somewhere along the way, I'd started building again, not just systems and stories, but self. New routines. New rhythms. I had stopped asking why it happened. I was starting to ask what I could do with it. Clarabelle hadn't changed. Not really. She was just trying on different masks, hoping one would stick. But I didn't need a new mask. I'd found my face again. I didn't notice the change in myself until I was already in the middle of it. One morning, I looked around the apartment I was renting above the bookstore and realized I hadn't thought about Clarabelle in over 3 days. Not even once. No anger. No imaginary arguments. No mental rewinds of all the missed red flags or humiliating details of that night at the cabin. Just stillness. For the first time in what felt like years, I wasn't living in reaction to someone else's betrayal. I was just living. It hit me while I was brushing my teeth. I stood there, mouth full of foam, toothbrush in hand, and suddenly it just clicked. She wasn't the center of my story anymore. She was a chapter. A necessary one. Maybe even a pivotal one. But not the entire book. I spit out the foam, looked in the mirror, and actually chuckled to myself. It wasn't much. But it was real. The site, the red string, had turned into something none of us predicted. It wasn't just a space for the betrayed anymore. People began submitting reflections from the other side, too. Former cheaters. People who had lied, manipulated, destroyed trust, and regretted it. Some were trying to make amends. Some were just finally facing themselves. We debated whether to publish those. Maggie was hesitant. I was curious. In the end, we did, with context, disclaimers, and clarity. And the reaction was overwhelming. Turns out, there's something raw and magnetic about hearing the other side finally admit they weren't misunderstood. They were just wrong. One story in particular gutted me. A woman from Vermont who admitted to sleeping with her husband's coworker during a ski trip. She said the worst part wasn't the affair, it was seeing her husband shrink afterward. She called it the quiet murder of a man's softness. I read that line 4 times before I had to step away from the screen. I knew that feeling too well. I was that man. Or I had been. That week, Maggie came to visit. Not for a meeting. Not for a brainstorm. Just to be. We didn't plan anything. We wandered the downtown streets, browsed used books, shared a pretzel from a food cart like two high school kids on their first date. That night, we sat on my floor with a bottle of wine neither of us finished and just talked. About everything. About nothing. About how her youngest asked if Daddy was still mad, and how she didn't know how to answer that without lying. About how I still couldn't hear acoustic guitar music without thinking of Clarabelle's morning playlist and wanting to punch a speaker. At one point, Maggie looked at me and said, "It's weird. I don't feel broken when I'm around you. I just feel in process." That word stuck with me. In process. Like grief, healing isn't a staircase, it's a spiral. You circle back, revisit old wounds, but each time you're slightly further along, slightly stronger, less likely to bleed at the touch. We didn't kiss that night. We didn't need to. But there was something different in the air when she left. Something less fragile. Something real. The next day, I got a letter. An actual letter. Handwritten. Mailed with a forever stamp and everything. No return address. Just my name, scribbled in ink that bled slightly from rain or tears, maybe both. It was from Clarabelle. The letter wasn't long, but it was dense. She didn't beg. She didn't justify. She just told the truth, maybe for the first time. She said the wedding was a trigger. Said she felt old, irrelevant, like she was watching a version of herself she couldn't reach anymore. Said she drank too much and let a moment take her places she couldn't return from. Said she knew she'd lost me long before the infection or the cabin or the flash drive. Then, at the bottom, she wrote, "I don't expect you to forgive me, but I do hope that someday you stop defining yourself by what I did." And for once, I wasn't angry. Because she was right. I folded the letter and slid it into a drawer I don't use often. Not as a keepsake. Not as a wound. But as a marker, like a grave for the man I used to be. Because I wasn't that man anymore. I was someone who knew how to rebuild. I was someone who now had the blueprints to help others do the same. You spend so long surviving something that when peace finally shows up, it almost feels suspicious. Like it knocked on the wrong door. For weeks, I kept waiting for another tremor, another message, another memory, another relapse into bitterness. But instead of breaking me again, time just held. It wrapped its arms around me, firm and still, like some unseen force saying, "It's safe now. You can breathe." And I did. The first true inhale came on a quiet Saturday morning. The air smelled like rain and coffee. My inbox was empty. My mind, for once, didn't immediately reach for old bruises. I stepped outside, barefoot, holding a steaming mug and listening to birds instead of waiting for closure. Because here's the truth no one tells you. You don't get closure from the people who broke you. You get it from yourself, piece by jagged piece. The red string continued to grow. Maggie and I started holding virtual meetups, anonymous video circles for people to talk, share, laugh, cry, sometimes just sit in silence together. One woman said it was the first time in years she'd said her husband's name out loud since the affair. A man from Indiana admitted he'd been sleeping in his car and reading our stories just to feel less alone. These weren't just strangers anymore. They were survivors. They were each other's mirrors. And me? I went back to teaching part-time. Music. The high school let me design a new elective, Soundtracks of Healing. We talked about breakup albums, symphonies written in grief, and how some of the best art in the world is born from heartbreak. I even started painting again. Real painting, not just messy rage strokes, but full-on canvases. Color, shape, intention. I sold a few. Framed one for Maggie. Maggie. We didn't rush anything. We didn't need to. Love that grows in the aftermath of ruin feels different, quieter, slower, more deliberate. Like a tree rooted in rock. She and I took road trips. We visited places we'd both once gone with our exes, not to erase those memories, but to write new ones on top. The first time we held hands in public, it wasn't sparks or fireworks. It was steadiness. Like coming home to a house you didn't know you'd already built. And Clarabelle? She moved to another state eventually. Started fresh, or tried to. Last I heard, she was working for a smaller credit union and posting self-help quotes again. I don't hate her. Not anymore. I don't wish her misery or karma. I just wish her honesty. With herself. Because that's where I finally found my freedom. I'm not the man who got cheated on. I'm not the man who got lied to. I'm the man who got back up. I'm the man who helped others do the same. So if you're reading this, sitting in the wreckage, wondering how to start over, let me say this. You already have. The moment you stopped pretending it didn't hurt, the moment you told someone the truth, the moment you stayed instead of begging to be chosen, that was the first step. The next ones? You get to decide what they look like. Mine just happened to involve good coffee, late-night painting, and the kind of love that doesn't need fixing because it never asked me to break. Thanks for reading. I think, finally, I'm okay. Actually, I'm better.